Father, I'm glad you're here. I want you to hear this. I have a confession to make.
Well, spit it out, son.
Greetings, vinyl community, and welcome to VC Friday, where today I will be talking about
Lather.
But before I get down to business, I do want to invite you to visit my Bandcamp page with the link down below in the description. I did get the official email from Bandcamp this week about how they are going to be requiring a Stripe account for payments. And what that means, bottom line, is that I will no longer in the future be able to sell my music on Bandcamp. So I do want to invite you to visit that page and buy a CD, buy an LP, buy more than one before it goes away. For 19 years, from its first mentions in 1977 to its eventual release in 1996, Läther was the great lost Frank Zappa album. It was the smile of the Freak Out set. While Zappa's albums over the years had veered wildly from style to style, Läther was to be a boxed behemoth encompassing the big picture version of Frank Zappa. We hear from Zappa the serious orchestral composer, the guitar hero, the scatological humorist, the jazz rock innovator, the social and sexual satirist, the weaver of intense rhythmic conundrums, and most of all, the creator of music that could only have sprung from the fertile imagination of Frank Zappa. The tale of Läther begins with lawsuits. Lots of lawsuits. Zappa had fallen out with his longtime manager, Herb Cohen, who is also the co-owner of Zappa's custom label, Discreet Records. And check out my video on the Apostrophe album for more about the Discreet label. Discreet was administered through Warner Brothers Records, and Zappa wasn't any too pleased with them either and was itching to get out of his contract. In the spring of 1977, with 4 albums owed to the label, Zappa delivered a live double LP he had assembled from a series of concerts at the Palladium in New York City at the end of 1976, titled Zappa in New York. He also delivered tapes of 3 further albums, just tapes with no cover art, liner notes, or musician credits, and declared that he had fulfilled his contract and was now a free agent. Warner's objected to Zappa in New York on the basis of the song Punky's Whips, an epic tale of drummer Terry Bozzio's homoerotic fixation on angel guitarist Punky Meadows. Zappa had gotten approval from Punky Meadows to release the song. Apparently, Punky actually signed a formal release for Frank. But Warner's still feared legal action. Meanwhile, Warner's didn't even consider the other 3 albums, assuming that Zappa was pulling a stunt similar to Van Morrison's contract-breaking move when he had gone into a studio and recorded dozens of improvised nonsense songs and delivered those to his record company. In fact, Zappa's Contractual obligation tapes contained some of the most sublime music of his career. But Warner Brothers failed to release the albums within the contractually stipulated time frame. So, with lawsuits flying back and forth among Zappa, Herb Cohen, and Warner Brothers, Zappa set about reconfiguring the 4 LPs that Warner Brothers was sitting on, along with some newer recordings, into a 4 LP boxed extravaganza that he dubbed
Lather.
Zappa's efforts to release Läther through another label, however, were met with further legal actions from Warner Brothers. Deals with EMI and Phonogram were stymied, as Warner Brothers claimed that they still had rights to those recordings. Warner's did briefly release Zappa in New York, complete with Punky's Whips, on the Discreet label in Europe, before hastily withdrawing it from the market. A resequenced version of Zappa in New York was finally given a general release in March 1978, which is what this is, with Punky's Whips removed and the opening song, Titties and Beer, edited to remove another reference to Punky Meadows. While Läther was held in limbo, Warner's eventually released the other 3 albums Zappa had delivered, one at a time, between September 1978 and May 1979. These were issued with minimal packaging, with covers by comics artist Gary Panter, and given essentially no publicity or advertising, although Zappa himself, despite being furious about the circumstances of their release, did deign to display one of them during an appearance on Saturday Night Live. So let's look at those albums. The first to be released in September 1978 was Studio Tan. This album consists mostly of recordings made at Caribou Studio in Nederland, Colorado in December 1974, concurrent with the recording of One Size Fits All, with overdubs added at the record plant in Los Angeles in early 1975. And since the deluxe version of One Size Fits All just came out recently, a lot of people have been talking about that and the circumstances of the recording at the snowy, mountainous Caribou Studios. I haven't talked about that because I can't afford the vinyl versions of that release, but maybe in the future. Side 1 of this album is dedicated to the 21-minute Gregory Peccary, which is an epic combination of rock band, orchestra, and spoken word that is Zappa's answer to Peter and the Wolf. Gregory Peccary tells the story of a white-collar pig, a nocturnal, gregarious wild swine, who is an executive with the firm of Big Swifty and Associates, Trendmongers, where his job is to dream up new trends. And in this adventure, Gregory invents the calendar, thereby earning the enmity of a gang of aging hippies who don't want to know how old they are. The ever-changing musical setting is often reminiscent of the cartoon music of Raymond Scott and Carl Stalling, but shot through with Zappa's unique jazz rock concoctions. After recording basic tracks at Caribou, Zappa and the core band of George Duke, Tom Fowler, and Chester Thompson were joined by a 21-piece orchestra that also included Zappa sideman Bruce Fowler on trombone. Also various session players who had previously contributed to the Grand Wazoo and Lumpy Gravy sessions. So there's some conceptual continuity right there. These were the further recordings at the record plant. And to top it off, more recording was done at UCLA's Royce Hall in September of '75 with the Abnusiel Zimuka Electric Symphony Orchestra, an ensemble that Zappa had assembled for a special presentation of his serious music. But more on that when we get to the Orchestral Favorites album. Side 2 of Studio Tan kicks off with Let Me Take You to the Beach, a burst of nostalgic rock and roll parody with obnoxiously wholesome teenage lyrics and an incongruous high-energy synthesizer overlay from Eddie Jobson. The basic track of bass and drums by Max Bennett and Paul Humphrey was recorded all the way back in 1969 during the Hot Rats sessions, and everything else was stripped off, and Zappa added his own guitar and backing vocals, Eddie Jobson's keyboards, bongos by Don Brewer of Grand Funk Railroad, and a lead vocal by Davey Moray in 1976 at the record plant. The album is completed by 2 lengthy instrumentals, revised music for guitar and low-budget orchestra, is a rewrite of a piece Zappa originally composed for Jean-Luc Ponty's 1970 album King Kong, where it appears under the title Music for Electric Violin and Low-Budget Orchestra. Again, basic tracks were recorded at Caribou with orchestral overdubs at the record plant, including humanly impossible overdubbed, harmonized trombone parts by Bruce Fowler. The twisty Tinker Toy rhythms of Redunzel round off the proceedings, featuring the One Size Fits All band recorded at Caribou with Ruth Underwood and George Duke shining during the scored sections and Zappa embarking on a glorious guitar solo. And I've got to show Gary Panter's artwork for the rear cover. I love his mouse, who's very unhappy about the state of the pizza box. The next album to appear in January 1979 was originally given the title Hot Rats 3 by Zappa, but Warner Brothers retitled it Sleep Dirt and adorned it with more Gary Panter artwork depicting the Japanese movie monster Hedorah, the smog monster. The album is entirely instrumental and draws on two basic sources, songs written for Zappa's never-realized 1972 stage musical Hunchin' Toot. Those songs were recorded by members of the One Size Fits All band at Caribou, and tracks left over when Warner Brothers compelled Zappa to cut his 1976 album Zoodalures, which Zappa had conceived as a double LP, down to the single LP, which you see here. And Filthy Habits, which is the first track on Sleep Dirt, is one of the latter. It's a leftover from Zoodalures, recorded at the record plant in 1976. And Zappa delivers multiple layers of seething, demonic guitar feedback, also playing keyboards. And he's accompanied by Dave Parlato on bass and Terry Bozzio on drums. Next come the four Hunchin' Toot songs, all in a row. Flambe, Spider of Destiny, Egyptian Strut, and Time is Money. James Birdleg's Human's bass parts on Flambe and Spider of Destiny were replaced by string bass played by Patrick O'Hearn in 1976. Now, although these four songs are presented here as instrumentals, all but Egyptian Strut originally had lyrics as part of the Hunchin' Toot musical. And CD editions of Sleep Dirt, released in the 90s, featured vocals overdubbed by Thana Harris in the early 80s, as well as new drum parts by Chad Wackerman. But the currently available CD, if it's still available, released in 2012 when Universal Music rolled out their newly acquired version of the Frank Zappa catalog, that reverted for the first time to the instrumental versions presented on this original LP. The title track, Sleep Dirt, is an acoustic guitar duet by Zappa with Birdleg's Humans, a rare chance to hear Zappa on acoustic. And the 13-minute epic The Ocean is the Ultimate Solution, another 1976 recording from the record plant, finds Zappa jamming with Patrick O'Hearn on string bass and Terry Bozzio on drums, with Zappa furiously flailing away at an electric 12-string guitar with the courses... Am I getting tired? No, my tongue got stuck.
One more time for the world!
With the courses tuned to dissonant intervals instead of the conventional octaves to produce what Bozzio described as a glass-shattering guitar sound. The last of the Warner Brothers discrete albums was Orchestral Favorites, released in May 1979. This was recorded at UCLA's Royce Hall in September 1975, where Zappa was presenting two concerts of his orchestral music, like I said before with the air quotes, his serious music. Zappa recycled the name Abnusiel Zimuka Electric Symphony Orchestra from his 1967 Lumpy Gravy project. The album material was not recorded during the live concerts, but during dedicated sessions. And Zappa initially assembled an album titled Six Things that combined the Royce Hall material with some of the more classically oriented Caribou recordings before reconfiguring it into the 5-track album that we have here. 3 of the 5 compositions were familiar to Zappa fans, as Bogus Pomp is a fantasia on themes from the 200 Motels soundtrack. Strictly Gentile, which opens the album, is an instrumental version of 200 Motels' finale. And Duke of Orchestral Prunes, which opens side 2, is of course an orchestrated version of the song Duke of Prunes from Absolutely Free, Frank Zappa's second album with the Mothers of Invention. The other 2 tracks are Pedro's Dowry and Naval Aviation in Art, both conceived as short ballet scenes with absurd scenarios. There's also a fancy gatefold release of the album from 2019 with Gary Panter's artwork unfortunately relegated to just a little inset there. But it's a very nice package, complete with a booklet. Meanwhile, Zappa, frustrated in his attempts to release Läther, told his story on tour and in radio appearances, including a visit to KROQ in Los Angeles in December 1977, where he played a test pressing of the entire 4LP set on the air, advising listeners to tape it since he couldn't release it himself. The album became legendary among the Zappa faithful. A bootleg version appeared and was widely distributed and avidly snapped up by fans, but Zappa would never release Läther during his lifetime. Even after regaining the rights to his music, Zappa chose in the CD era to release Zappa in New York, Studio Tan, Sleep Dirt, and Orchestral Favorites on CD, all as separate albums, albeit with revisions. Zappa in New York in particular was greatly expanded, remixed, and overdubbed, and Sleep Dirt, as I mentioned before, was overdubbed with vocals, as well as new drum parts, and some parts from the original got stripped off. So the CD editions from the 90s and the CD edition that reverts to the LP version in 2012, those are very different animals. So what exactly is Läther? Is it just those 4 albums in a box? By no means. Studio Tan is the only one of the 4 that even appears on Läther in its entirety, comprising sides 3 and 8 of the original 4LP Läther. The other albums have been placed in the Zappa Mixmaster along with half a dozen other tracks, edited and rearranged into a whole new edifice, all held together with grout. What's grout? Grout is the word used by Zappa fans for short collages of sped-up musical snippets, absurdist dialogue, sound effects, and studio buffoonery that appear between the tracks on Läther. In fact, the first thing you hear on Läther is a grout segment.
Well, don't be ashamed.
So, what's on Läther? Side 1 of Läther begins with Egyptian Strut from Sleep Dirt, very majestic track that serves as an overture. It's a great opener. It really soars. I think it works better as an opener than it did as the closing part of side 1 on Sleep Dirt. That's followed by the title track from Sleep Dirt, the acoustic guitar duet, and then Naval Aviation in Art, the short piece from Orchestral Favorites. Then we get into the new material that wasn't part of the 4 LPs that Zappa had delivered to Warner Brothers. There are half a dozen tracks in a row, starting with a version of A Little Green Rosetta, which is a song that Zappa would later re-record for Joe's Garage. This is a 1975 recording from the record plant, collaged with a guitar solo from Osaka, Japan in 1976. That's followed by Duck Duck Goose, which is a jam from the Hammersmith Odeon in London, February 1977, plus a studio collage that spans a period of years. Then Down in de Doo from 1972, which is a lovely instrumental that appeared on the expanded apostrophe. For the Young Sophisticate from Bollock Studio in Inglewood, part of the the Overnight Sensation sessions in 1973. That song would later appear in a live version on Tinseltown Rebellion. So that was the first official release of that song. That's the end of side one. Side two begins with Trying to Grow a Chin and Broken Hearts Are for Assholes. And these are both recorded in London in 1977. Broken Hearts for Assholes is also partly from Köln, Germany in the same month. And those are both songs that would appear in studio versions on Zappa's album Shake Your Booty, which appeared between Sleep Dirt and Orchestral Favorites. Zappa had gotten a new contract. He was on the Zappa Records imprint in the US through Phonogram. So that was his first album that he was able to put out on his own imprint, but Warner Brothers was still marketing those unauthorized releases, so it was kind of funny how that album came out in between the other two. So Trying to Grow a Chin and Broken Hearts Are for Assholes, and those are followed by The Legend of the Illinois Enema Bandit from Zappa in New York, and that's side two. Side three is side two of Studio Tan. Let Me Take You to the Beach, revised music for guitar and low-budget orchestra, and Redunzel. Side four is Honey Don't You Want a Man Like Me, which is a song that appeared on Zappa in New York, but this is a different edit. Both versions are edited together from multiple performances from that run of concerts at the Palladium. They're just different versions. That's followed by, well, these are all songs. Side four is all songs from Zappa in New York. It's followed by The Black Page number 1, which is a shortened edit of the Zappa in New York track. The Zappa in New York track was attached to the drum solo version of The Black Page, where Terry Bozzio just played the extremely complex rhythms of that track on the drum kit. The Black Page number 1 then is with the melody applied over the drum part. Big Leg Emma, the remake of the single from 1967, and Punky's Whips, the very contentious, long epic track, which is such a wonderful piece of music. It's a great example of Zappa's going completely low in the lyrical department and extremely high in the musical department at the same time. And when I say extremely low in the verbal department, I don't mean that as a denigration or as a negative criticism, because it's funny as hell, but it's not polite. That's side 4. Side 5 is Flambe from Sleep Dirt, but this is a shorter edit. And then The Purple Lagoon, the long, it's a jazz track. It's got a short composed head, but long string of solos making up the bulk of the recording. And that it itself makes up the bulk of the sides. So just those two tracks are side 5. Side 6 is Pedro's Dowry from Orchestral Favorites. Läther, the title track, which is the track that appeared on Zappa in New York under the title I Promise Not to Come in Your Mouth. Gorgeous instrumental. So with that title you can see another example of what I was talking about, where there is that dichotomy between the musical and the verbal side. Because the music is just so ethereal, wonderful. Eddie Jobson really shines on keyboards. Zappa plays some amazing atmospheric stuff. But what could be more blunt and earthy than that title, I Promise Not to Come in Your Mouth, which is also a line from Punky's Whips. Another shortened track from Sleep Dirt, Spider of Destiny. And finally, from the Orchestral Favorites album, Duke of Orchestral Prunes. That's side 6. Side 7 is Filthy Habits from Sleep Dirt. And once again, it's an edited version, shorter than the version on the Sleep Dirt album. Titties and Beer from Zappa in New York, a Dr. Demento favorite. And The Ocean is the Ultimate Solution, another track from Sleep Dirt that's drastically shortened for the Läther edit. Also differently titled. The Läther version is known as One More Time for the World, which is a line from Trying to Grow a Chin. Finally, side 8 is side 1 of Studio Tan. It is The Adventures of Gregory Peccary. On the Studio Tan album, the track had just been titled Gregory Peccary. Here it's given the proper title of The Adventures of. So why Läther? Well, Zappa, finding himself in this period with a contingent of younger and good-looking band members, evidently got a kick out of bringing them around to visit the more flamboyant gay bars in New York City. And that provided them with a lot of material to mention in various songs, especially the likes of Broken Hearts Are for Assholes, which appears on here. And the leather bar scene kind of brought the inspiration for that to be used as the title. The spelling with an umlaut apparently is some obscure joke about the Swiss pronunciation, which, as a person partially of Swiss descent, I don't get. But then, as a person of Irish descent, I really don't get much of anything. Zappa died in 1993, and about a year later, Rykodisc acquired the rights to Zappa's back catalog from the Zappa estate, and released a rollout of the full catalog in 1995, and then went looking for other ways to exploit the catalog. And one of the welcome ways they found was in September 1996, they released Läther. They finally unleashed the holy grail of missing from the Zappa catalog on the world, and this is what they put out. This is the 3 CD release from Rykodisc with their little paper slipcase thingy there. Cover design conceived by Dweezil Zappa. And they augmented the original 26-track, 2.5-hour program with 4 bonus tracks. And here is the promotional version of the album that was sent out for reviewers. No moo cow on this version. If you weren't paying for it, you didn't get a moo cow. So the bonus tracks were Egyptian Strut 1993. It's an alternate mix of the track from Sleep Dirt with Chad Wackerman on drums. Leather Goods, live jam from London, which is the source of the track on Läther, Duck Duck Goose. Duck Duck Goose was edited from Leather Goods. Revenge of the Knick-Knack People. This has a lot to do with the grout segments throughout the album. It's an excerpt from a tape collage of recordings of the 1960s mothers, all cut up together, a lot of studio clowning, and sort of orchestral bits, all collaged together and sped up. That's Revenge of the Knick-Knack People, but this is only a couple minutes of it. Apparently it was like a 12-minute tape that Zappa sped up to 6 minutes. And finally, Time is Money, which is the one track from Sleep Dirt that did not appear at all on the Leather track listing. In 2012, Universal Music acquired the Zappa catalog, and they released their own version of Leather, this time with Norman Seeff photography replacing the moo cow. This is all very period appropriate, so we get a lot of pictures of Frank in assorted stages of being pied. But the Universal Music did not include the bonus tracks, so those you need to seek out a copy of the Rykodisc version. Ryko also did release a vinyl version of Leather, but in Japan only, and only for a very brief time. So that's why on VC Friday I'm showing you a CD instead of a vinyl of Leather. Universal has not released a vinyl version, but I would not be at all surprised if they get around to that one of these days. So that's VC Friday. Thanks to the Sixth Beatle for suggesting the look at Leather. I told him I thought that was a great idea and I'd probably do something like that in the future, and guess what? This is the future. I do want to repeat my invitation to visit my Bandcamp page. It will be going away sooner or later. Bandcamp did not give me a specific date for when they're cutting off payments through PayPal, but I'm not going to be able to do the Stripe thing, so that's going to be it. It's really sad that Bandcamp is doing that, but I don't think there's a lot of say that we can have in the matter. So thanks very much for watching. Be well. I will talk with you all again soon. Bye-bye for now.
Everybody sing along like a big rock show.